So we are moving on to look at gradient. So our title at the top here is gradient. So as a reminder, in a linear rule, y equals mx plus c. Our first sentence says the symbol for gradient is m, and the gradient is the m. If it's y equals mx plus c, it's the m in front of the x. The proper word is it's called the coefficient of the x. So our first sentence reminds us lines sloping up have a positive gradient, and our line sloping up is the blue line. So this blue line, it has a positive gradient. So I am labelling it positive gradient because it is sloping up. If we continue reading, lines sloping down have a negative gradient, and the red line is sloping down. So the red line we know has a negative gradient. And we have already done some work on horizontal and vertical lines, so we should know from yesterday that horizontal lines have a zero gradient. And our horizontal line is our purpley pink one, so this has a zero gradient. We also did that vertical lines have an infinite or an undefined gradient. But for today, we're really looking at how we actually find the gradient, and most of ours are going to be either a positive gradient or a negative gradient. Now, you should know from year 7 and 8 that one way to find the gradient is to use this rule, rise over run. Rise over run. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pick 2 points. And I'm going to go back up to our notes, and I'm going to look at the blue line to start us off. So I need to find 2 points that are on the blue line, and an easy one for me to choose, I'm marking here in blue, will be the y-intercept. And maybe I'm going to go right up to the top, and I'm going to use this point right at the top. So I need to first of all work out how much it rises, and I'm going to start at the dot at the bottom, and it rises 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 units up. So it rises 14 units up. I want to know how many units it runs along. So it runs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 across. So if I go down and do my working out, for my blue line, the gradient will be rise, which is 14, over run, which is 7, and that simplifies to give 2. I'm also going to find the gradient of the negative line, and to find the gradient of the negative line, it's exactly the same thing. I need to do rise over run. So I'm going to clear my working so that it's a little bit of a neater work page for me. The first thing I need to do is I need to pick 2 dots. And I'm going to need to pick dots that are right on the line. So maybe I'm going to stick to the bottom part, and I'm going to choose this as 1 dot and this as another dot. I'm going to start at the bottom dot, and I'm going to count the rise. So it rises 1, 2, 3, 4 units up, and it runs across -1, -2, -3, -4 units across. So if I go down to fill in my working out, my gradient is going to be the rise was +4, the run is -4, and that simplifies quite nicely to give -1. Sometimes it doesn't simplify so nicely, and then we'll just leave it as a fraction. So once again, this method, it involves choosing 2 points and then doing how many it rises up or down and how many it runs to the right or the left, and rise over run. The second thing we're going to look at is how we could do the gradient using a rule instead. And the rule we're going to use is y2 take y1 over x2 take x1. And I'm going to show twice how this method works. So to do it, first of all, I'm going to label my first point. The first thing here is an x, and the second number is always a y. Same in the second bracket, the first number is an x and the second number is always a y. So that we can tell which is which, I'm going to label this first one x number 1 and y number 1. And I'm going to label the second one x number 2 and y number 2. So if we go to our rule, I'll rewrite it here so we've got it directly in our notes, y2 subtract y1 divided by x2 subtract x1, all we have to do is substitute into this rule. So let's look at our first one. I'll highlight them at the top here. Our y number 2 is negative 4. So when I fill into my rule, y2 is negative 4. Now I have to do take away because that's what the rule is for the rise. And now I have to take away y number 1. And my y number 1 I've highlighted is a 2. On the denominator, if we look at the rule, it says now I need to do x number 2, and I'm highlighting where it says we're up to in the rule, x number 2. So if I go back up to my point, x number 2, I'm highlighting is an 8. So I need to fill in 8. Then the rule has a takeaway, so I do a takeaway. And now I need x number 1, and let me highlight my x number 1. My x number 1 is a 5, so I'm going to fill in a 5. Now I can just calculate using some arithmetic. So negative 4 subtract 2 on the numerator is negative 6. 8 subtract 5 on the denominator is 3. And once again, it's a really nice fraction that simplifies, and the gradient is negative 2. So if I graphed these points that we had in our question, which I'll just re-highlight now, if I graphed these 2 points on some axes and I drew a line, it would have a gradient of negative 2. It would be a line that's sloping down. So let's find the gradient of the second point. So once again, I'm going to label x and y because that's the way points always go. And the same for the next one, x and y. And I'm going to label the first one x number 1 and y number 1. And I'll label the second point x number 2 and y number 2. Now to find the gradient, we can do rise over run, or we can use this rule, the second y take away the first y, divided by the second x take away the first x. And that's the same as the rise over the run. So let's fill in some numbers. Well, the y number 2, I've just highlighted, it's 9, so I'm going to fill in 9. Take away, now if we go to the rule, I need to find the first y, and the first y is a negative 4, so I'm going to fill into the rule negative 4. Now once again, it's 9 take away negative 4. On the denominator, I have to get the second x number. If I highlight, the second x number is a 1. And then take away, and now I have to do the first x number, and the first x number is a negative 1. So 1 take away negative 1. Now remembering about my negatives, on the top, 9 take 4 is the same as 9 add 4, and 1 take 1, or 1 subtract negative 1 is the same as 1 add 1, which is a 2. And I can just leave the gradient as 13 over 2. That one doesn't simplify very nicely, so we'll just leave it as 13 over 2. So just again recapping, there are 2 ways you can find the gradient. If you've got a picture, like the ones we had at the top here, I'll highlight them in yellow to remind us. If we've got a picture, the easiest way to find the gradient is to pick 2 points and use this rule, rise over run. If instead of having a picture, we've got our coordinates, then we use the rule, y2 take y1 on the top and x2 take x1 on the bottom, and we did 2 examples to show how that rule works.